Can't wait to see the recording. I have another meeting to get to. You all have a wonderful night.
All right. Good night. Thank you, Jane. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, good evening, everybody. We're still letting people in. I think we've got just a few of us now, but more are coming. I hear ding, ding all the time. I hope you don't. All right. And who's got snow so far? I'm in Boulder and all we have is rain. Okay. All right. I think that we can get started, and I will let people in as they come. So if we take a few minutes here. So I welcome you all to a discussion of money and politics and guns, sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Colorado's Task Force on Gun Violence Prevention. I'm Rionda Osman, and this evening our guest is Sandra Fish, a data journalist of the Colorado Sun. This evening, Sandra will talk to us about the role of gun right groups and gun safety groups in Colorado. We're recording this session, and the recording will be posted on the League's YouTube channel. Sandra will have time to respond to questions, and I ask that you put questions into the chat and we'll address them at the end of her remarks. Before we start, I'd like to remind us all that the League of Women Voters is a grassroots organization that has worked since 1920 to improve local, state, and federal government and to engage all citizens in the decisions that impact their lives. The Colorado League was founded in 1928. The League neither supports nor opposes candidates or parties, but we do interact with elected leaders at all levels based on our positions on public policy issues. Our positions are formed after member research, study, and consensus. And yes, we've come to consensus. And we're passionate advocates, both women and men, who work to influence public policy issues. Now, I'm pleased to introduce Sandra Fish. She is a correspondent for the Colorado Sun, focusing on politics and data. She's reported on politics at news outlets in Iowa, Florida, New Mexico, and Colorado, as well as nationally. And she was a full-time journalism instructor at CU Boulder for 8 years. And this evening, we must acknowledge that money and politics are inextricably intertwined, and gun politics are no different. A central question is, what is the role of gun right groups and gun safety groups in Colorado? And Sandra will discuss how both groups spend money on lobbying and campaigns, as well as offer some history of the issues in Colorado, including a brief overview of how gun laws have changed over time since Columbine. And so, Sandra, welcome.
Thank you so much, Rionda. And I really appreciate the League of Women Voters. At my first job, a gazillion years ago, or in the early 80s, when I covered the Carroll County Commission in Iowa, there was a League of Women Voters. The only other person other than the commissioners was a League of Representatives, League of Women Voters representatives. And I remember once in one of these meetings, one of the county commissioners said, "I didn't say that thing you said I said." And Virginia Hageman said, "Yes, you did." And I still remember her name from 1982. And I really, really appreciated it. You know, on the gun laws, I started covering the legislature in 1999. And I'm remembering how it was the first year that we'd had a Republican governor for quite a while. The legislature had been Republican dominated, and Republicans were really on a move to try and do things like no permits for concealed carry and that sort of thing, really to liberalize gun laws. And then Columbine happened. And I mean, one person did try to propose something to arm teachers, which didn't really go far at all. The following year in 2000, some lawmakers tried to do, there had been no background checks really at gun shows and in some other places. And they tried to go through the legislature and that didn't work. And people took it to a ballot initiative, which is, we've had ballot initiatives here since 1880, 4 years after Colorado became a state. And it passed overwhelmingly, closing the gun show loophole. You look at what has happened since then. The state has gradually become more blue. In 2006, well, in 2004, Democrats took over both sides of the legislature for the first time in 40 years. In 2006, elected a Democratic governor, Bill Ritter, and we haven't had a Republican governor since then. In 2013, there was another real push for gun laws after the Aurora Theater shootings and after Sandy Hook. And the legislature pushed some pretty strong measures, including a ban on magazines more than 15 capacity, and some other things that gun rights proponents really didn't like. You saw then later that summer, 2 lawmakers recalled, 2 Democratic senators recalled, one from Pueblo, in a pretty overwhelming way. And I would say at the time, and I think people would still say, this was a matter more of personality than it was of than the gun thing. John Morse just narrowly was recalled, and then and Republicans took their spots, and then Edie Hudak, who was I think from Arvada, a senator from Arvada, resigned rather than going through a recall process. And so you had sort of a lull there, and Republicans ended up in 2014, they won back the Senate. So from 2015 through 2019, Republicans had the Senate. You really couldn't do very much. And then in 2018, when Democrats took back the Senate, they increased their margins in the House and have ever since then. Governor Jared Polis, one of the things that I look at, the death penalty separate from this issue, but, in 2013, Democrats wanted to end the death penalty in Colorado, and Governor Hickenlooper indicated that he wouldn't sign that bill. And that's one of the things that people did early on in Governor Jared Polis's administration. Clearly people are fighting the gun safety initiatives in the court system, and they've gotten some victories, like with the Supreme Court decision in a New York case. It appears that Governor Polis isn't hot on assault weapons ban, because it's, what is an assault weapon? How do you define it? So you continue to have these efforts to strengthen the laws. Clearly, Rocky Mountain gun owners, it takes these things to court, like they're taking the things passed last year to court. And it is interesting to look at the money. I mean, one of the things that I would say, and I'm going to share my screen here in a moment, is that, as far as especially lobbying, this is not necessarily a big money issue. There are other, Excel tops the list of lobbyist spenders every year, almost, except for one year when this out-of-state group came in and spent a ton of money trying to kill a healthcare bill. I mean, it was amazing. So I'm going to share a link to this in the chat and just go to my screen is sort of a mess, but and just talk about, I've done a couple of stories along this line, and I've gathered some new data and have some resources. And, both sides get involved in competitive campaigns, especially at the federal level. And I feel like I'm going to just go to this story that I did, 3 years ago now, about gun control groups spending on and gun rights groups spending on congressional campaigns and state campaigns. And I've got kind of the big takeaways here. In 2014, gun rights groups spent a lot to help elect Cory Gardner to the US Senate. And if you look at chart, show up, they spent $2.7 million opposing Mark Udall and $1.2 million supporting Cory Gardner. In 2018, they spent gun control groups. That was sort of the last year in Colorado. 2014, you had come off this recall, these couple of gun laws that the gun rights people really didn't like. You'd done these Senate recalls, and you had this big national state Senate contest that helped Republicans take back the Senate. And the gun rights groups really came out strong in that. But then, the gun control side, the preventing gun violence, came out strong to help Jason Crow defeat Mike Kaufman in 2018. They spent nearly $2 million opposing Mike Kaufman, a little less than $1 million supporting Jason Crow. In 2020, gun rights groups spent some money opposing John Hickenlooper and supporting Gardner. But I mean, it's kind of amazing to see and what the difference is. Gun control groups spent $1.8 million in 2020 opposing Cory Gardner. You just had this big switch from the gun rights groups spending a ton of money, and part of that is a national thing. Of the National Rifle Association has their problems. They've got financial problems. They've got institutional issues. They're being sued in the state of New York. It's kind of a mess. And, that story is 3 years old, but I went back today and looked at and got an Open Secrets spreadsheet and pared it down to 2022 in Colorado. And I'd note that, they just really, there were gun control groups, as Open Secrets classified it, gave heavily to Michael Bennett and Jason Crow. Gun rights groups gave heavily to Lauren Boebert, a little bit less to Ken Buck, and some to Doug Lamborn. They weren't big players in the outside spending, and the outside spending typically comes in highly competitive contests. And it can, as it did in 2018 and 2014, it can be a significant factor. And it just wasn't there in 2022. These groups actually did not get involved in the 8th Congressional District, which was one of the most competitive in the country. I mean, I have to say, the 3rd CD, that contest that Lauren Boebert won by 546 votes, was the closest in the country. And those groups, that to me is a pretty limited number. At the state level, the same thing plays out. Gun rights groups were really, really active in 2014. and gun control advocates have just gradually overtaken them. And I mean, this is a kind of an interesting thing of a different chart of what, I mean, the groups advocating for some sort of gun regulation really just came on the scene in Colorado in 2018. And you hit the peak here in 2014. And, I've got information on how much these people have had received throughout their careers. But state level spending really peaked. You look at, 2012, it wasn't that significant candidate wise. And gun control, I'll tell you, post Columbine, things like Colorado ceasefire got really involved, and they were spending some money in the early aughts, and were one of the more. They were kind of a minor player, but they were a player in helping Democrats take back the legislature. They spent heavily in the 2014 cycle, $1.5 million compared to a million for gun control groups, gun rights groups did. But then you see this gradual thing of like 2018 in the state legislature, those gun control groups really spent a lot. And that's the year that Democrats won back the state Senate. They've spent more in 2020. I haven't really looked at 2022. I would mention, we in our state, Rocky Mountain gun owners gets a lot of attention. I get their emails, and they are always trying to get people out to public hearings and stuff. But I did the story in 2014 for the Colorado Independent. They don't spend that much money. Their influence I've noticed is really at this caucus level and of supporting candidates by word of mouth to their membership. In 2014, I went to the Jefferson County GOP Assembly, and it was interesting to watch because that was where, Mario Nicolais made, I'm saying his last name wrong, probably. He's a friend of mine. But he made the Republican ballot, but he was defeated by somebody who was backed by Rocky Mountain gun owners. And same for Lang Sias. He was defeated he made the ballot, but he was defeated by a woman supported by them. Those, the guy in Mario's district, he defeated Mario, but he didn't win the general. And that's one of the things that has happened with them. They support candidates who often don't win the general. Their candidate won the general in the seat that Evie Hudak had resigned from, but then she lost 2 years later in the regular election. I just pulled figures off Tracer. They've got an independent spending committee or a super PAC that can spend as much as they want. And over their lifetime, I think they've been around for maybe 8 years, and they've only spent like 500, a little more than $500,000. And their small donor committee has been around longer than that and has spent about $214,000. Those committees give directly to candidates. The independent spending groups send those mailers saying this person is terrible. They spend probably more money attacking Republican candidates with whom they disagree. Cole Wist is one of them. And he lost his House seat to Tom Sullivan, and they sent, I think even in the general, I believe they sent communications out against him. So I've also looked at state level lobbying. And as I said earlier, the spending, comparatively speaking, is low. And I would just like show you, last year people spent like $51 million or something. And it's just goes up, up, up. But the top spenders are virtually always like Excel. Sage Therapeutics is somebody who does drugs that are psychotherapy related. Copic is the medical malpractice insurer. HCA, clearly a healthcare company. Black Hills Corporation, energy company. I mean, that's $51 million. Most of the spenders are actually business spenders. I took a look in the middle of last year when it was $32 million. I mean, most of this money has been spent now, and I have not had this. When I put this together, it's a lot of work because I have 1,500 lines of computer code to make sure that the employer names are standardized and all the same. And then I have to take out, there's a lot of duplication in there where lobbyists are paying other lobbyists or the firm is paying the lobbyists. And there's just a lot of different things that people do that needs to be fixed. And it's a time consuming activity. But, one of the things, I did a comparison of month over month. This was, which one was? Oh, this is 2023, and we'd just gotten to February at this point. And the top firms, again, Excel, Sage, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things like last year that I thought was interesting was that you have a lot of people who show up, and on things like reproductive health and gun bills and some other things, that are sort of more sensitive issues. But you have a lot of people who show up, but the number of lobbyists is really limited. Like, the most heavily lobbied bill at the middle of the session last year was on the Fair Work Week employment standards. There were like 200 firms or lobbyists and 161 clients, primarily businesses. And that bill was voted down in committee. But these other bills like greenhouse gas emissions, land use, Senate Bill 213, which is a big deal last year, that had a lot of lobbyists working on it, a lot of clients. I mean, those are pretty high numbers, and even the all genders in public bathrooms don't come. The gun and reproductive health bills don't come close to that. The extreme risk protection order petitions adjustments that they did last year had 93 lobbyists and lobbying firms and 67 clients on them. Increasing the minimum age to buy firearms, protecting, and then you have some reproductive health bills. The waiting period didn't have that many clients, neither did gun violence victims' access to the judicial system. And even prohibiting assault weapons in Colorado, but maybe people just thought that wasn't going to work out because even one of the original sponsors bailed on it. So, you have a lot of people show up for those hearings, and maybe some of you go to some of these, and I commend you for hanging in there because they can be brutal, but the spending is not a lot. And I took a look at in 2023 the groups that are solely lobbying on gun issues, and I just put together a little Excel chart here. Everytown for Gun Safety Action Fund spent over $100,000. Giffords spent like over 50, Colorado ceasefire. And then these other groups, you know, the National Shooting Sports Foundation, the National Rifle Association, Rocky Mountain gun owners didn't spend that much. I think it was like about $6,000. And then the Brady campaign spent a little bit. But, you know, the groups themselves aren't paying that much to lobby. Now, I remember from the distant past, like 20 some years ago, there would be some volunteer lobbyists there, and they're not in, they're volunteers, they're not being paid, so they're not included in this. But, you know, to me, it's just, you know, the at this point, the people who want to have more restrictions on guns, make emphasis on gun safety, they are spending more at lobbying at the state level. On the federal level, lobbying on gun issues is a lot higher. And gun rights groups are spending a lot more than gun control groups at the federal level. And one of those big spenders is the National Association for Gun Rights, and they're a sister group to Rocky Mountain gun owners. They're based in Colorado. You see them down here. They spent, to look closely at my computer screen, they spent more than $1 million in 2023 lobbying the federal government. You know, I need to add a resource to this because, and I'll do it in a second here before your very eyes, but sure. I think that federal spending is still not a lot. And I have some resources here that you can look at and use to follow the money on your own. Open Secrets, I've worked there as a part-time editor for a while, but I have too much to do at the Sun. And they have some great tables. Like they have, you know, here are gun rights lobbying over time. If we get that to open, start opening the other one too. And you know, they spent $13 million last year, had, well, 46 lobbyists, 9 clients. You know, when you see the National Shooting Sports Foundation, but Gun Owners of America, the National Association for Gun Rights, you know, the NRA is like the only third on this list at this point. But let's compare that $13 million to, that is the wrong page. And I'm going to fix that. So they spent $2.3 million in last year. So that's a huge difference, 13 million versus 2.26 million. And I would say that I feel like maybe if I were to look at these numbers, I kind of feel like perhaps what I draw from this is that gun control advocates are spending their resources on getting people elected. Certainly they have lobbyists. And I would say my experience too of looking at the state house, you know, an effective lobbyist is an effective lobbyist. And if you have people who believe in your cause who are elected, you know, you don't need 1 million lobbyists. You don't, like the healthcare company, or it was a healthcare nonprofit at the national level, they spent more than $1 million on various advertising aimed at the public a few years ago. And, you know, I didn't even know that they had lobbyists, and they weren't that effective. They got the bill they didn't like watered down, but still. You know, another thing that Open Secrets has that if you were into spreadsheets and looking at them on your own, they've got a really good spreadsheet, and they've got campaign contributions. Gun rights still, their campaign contributions since the 1990s still exceed those of gun control groups. But like I said, in recent years, since Sandy Hook, since 2014, that has really changed. And you can open this spreadsheet in a different thing and download it if you want. Look at, they've got people who their career money from the NRA. They've got all sorts of things. They've got lobbying in there. So if you're super into this, that's a really nice data set to use. I use Tracer a lot to look up some of these groups. And like I said, the groups in this chart, several of those groups do have political action committees or independent spending committees, and they will spend money. I don't see them as among the top spenders. Tracer is the place to go for campaign finance in Colorado. It's not, it can be difficult to navigate. Like, I should just look and see if Ceasefire has it. So they've got an independent expenditure committee. So let's just look and see how much they've spent over time. And they've only spent like $27,000, and they've been around for a while. They were created in 2012. They're not a big spender. One of the things about this is it's kind of difficult to, they've got a basic political committee. These small donor committees can give directly to candidates. And let me just look at, $26,000. So not a big spender there. I also have a site where I take Tracer bulk stuff, data, and I match candidates up and separate it out into super PACs and issue committees. And I'll just show you that really quickly. It's something where you can look at, let's just look at super PACs during spending during, and you can sort these things descending. You can run SQL queries on them. This is, if you're into data, that's a little bit easier to look at. I typically actually too have in those things outside spending. I'm not seeing it right now. I do usually have outside spending in there, and maybe I didn't do it that year. I would think I did. I do have that, I think, for school boards last year. So you can see what people have spent in certain contests and the amount, this is something where they're doing television spending in Denver and Colorado Springs 11. So that may be useful to some people. One other, and then I wanted to show you the Secretary of State's website. They've got a lobbyist page here. This is for the lobbyists. They've put up their data in a format that they've been giving it to me, and it's still, I think it's good. It's still, for a novice who's not into doing data things, it's still really difficult. But you can do searches. You can do searches by lobbyist. Let's just see what happens if I search ceasefire. They're a client. So let me go back. You can search by clients and see who people's lobbyists are. So, I mean, this is from a long time ago. This brings up everything. Like Ann McGeehan is a former state representative. Bill Hanna isn't around anymore. Ellen Brilliant is a friend of mine. She's not doing that anymore. Anne Marie Jensen is also another friend that, you know, so you would maybe try to limit this and do, but you can. Let's see. You know, you can see who's representing Rocky Mountain gun owners at various times. Like Taylor Rhodes had been representing them. Joe Neville has represented them. Dudley Brown, their executive director, has represented them. I think that Ian Escalante is their current lobbyist. And if you click on these individual lobbyists, you can look at their past disclosure reports and registrations. And he's reporting being paid $1,000 a month. Okay. I would say I'm going to show you another resource, but this is a place where you could look up a bill. Does anybody know what the current bill numbers are of any of the I mean, some of those hearings are going on right now. Am I right?
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
SB 131, SB 24-131 is up next Wednesday.
Okay.
It's a Senate bill.
The Senate bill.
Oh, Senate bill. Okay. 131?
Yes.
Okay. Must have messed that up. I think that their keys are in the wrong. This can be confusing. That, you know, so there should be 125 matching records. There's a lot of duplication in this because people will change their position. Numerous people will be lobbying for somebody. So there's just a lot of different things. So you can see Colorado State University, American Society of Pediatrics. You know, I showed you the groups that are specific to gun issues. That's all they do. But there are a lot of other groups that are interested in this. You know, so the Associated Governments of Northwest Colorado opposed to it. And they're the only, you know, the only ones on that page represented by the ORFs. The city of Colorado Springs also opposed to it. City of Boulder supporting. You can download this and it's a little easier to look at. But this is someplace where you can, I mean, if you're really into this and really following it, this is a place where you could identify like communities. Like if you're living in Colorado Springs, you might be able to contact your lawmakers. And, you know, this is interesting to me. So Brownstein Hyatt is representing the city of Colorado Springs. And we can go over here and look at January, they were paid $277,000. We can look at this report and Sandra Fish can get very close to the screen. Sorry about that. I'm just gonna have to like really, sorry. Like I didn't even see them listed here, and maybe I'm gonna go back to the previous page and look at the current month. Okay, so the city of Colorado Springs paid him $4,500 in and, you know, but the city of Colorado Springs probably has numerous bills on here that they're working on, you know, overdose prevention centers, wildfire risk, etc. So, you know, to me, a lot of these groups have a range of things that they're interested in. You can't say how much was spent on lobbying this particular bill. So, you know, one other thing I wanted to show here. There we go. ProPublica has a really great site where you can look up nonprofits. And so if you were doing research, so let's stick that in there right now. I gotta get rid of that capital letter. You know, like you can do a search and look at their 2022 990 and see, you know, they had $424,000 in income, and it looks like they spent about 429,000, so kind of in the red there. This has quite a bit of information, like what their mission is. At some point, I'm just going to scroll through this here for you. So you can see that Dudley Brown was paid by them $78,000 last year. And Taylor Rhodes was paid $10,925, which isn't very much. So like I would go in here and type Dudley Brown's name and look at people and see that he's getting paid by the National Association for Gun Rights $143,000, which is a related group, you know, and getting paid $78,000. I mean, it's interesting because this group is listed as it's incorporated in Virginia, but they're actually their address for lobbying purposes is in Colorado. So, you know, this is in 2021. He got a little pay cut there. But so that, you know, I feel like that's another great resource. And so now I'm going to stop the screen share and answer some questions if people have them. So what questions do you have, if any? And I'm going to share the bit.ly link again. Oops.
Okay. I guess one thing that's might be adjacent, but have you started to see the effects of the Bruin decision?
Remind me which that one is.
That was in the let's see, that was the New York State law that was struck down by the Supreme Court because and this, you know, theory of if it wasn't against the law in 1830, then it shouldn't be against the law now.
I think that's a difficult and complicated thing. You know, I think that people are trying, like with the assault weapon law, people are trying to craft things in a way to address those decisions and make them somehow more palatable. So, you know, or you know, so they would fit the court's legal thing. I think that's difficult to do because that was a very, very different time. And, you know, that's a difficult thing unless, I don't know. I, you know, I'm not following these proposals as closely as I am, say, elections proposals, because most of my time is right now is being spent on elections. But that's a great question. You know, it'd be a great question to ask lawmakers.
Yeah. Okay. Well, where do you see the money being spent this fall for guns?
That's a good question. Let me think about this. You know, I look at the elections coming up, and I think that the primaries for the 3 open congressional seats are just going to be freewheeling. You don't know what will happen. I mean, I said at the beginning of the year to some people after Representative Boebert decided to move to the 4th, and then Representative Lamborn decided to retire. It's like anything can happen. We don't know. And anything has happened. Ken Buck resigned this week. And I think you're going to see big money, but it's not going to be related to guns in those primaries. It's going to be related to what kind of Republican are people. And it's possible that it could come into play in the 8th congressional district. But the NRA really does not have the money to be a player anymore. And so it would have to come from something like the Dudley Brown groups. And I don't see that they don't spend their money that way exactly on campaigns. You know, at the state level, I would expect there to be more spending by gun control related groups, and you know, helping people in seats that Democrats might have a better chance of winning. I think it's yeah, and I think that you're going to see people not. This is why I'm in New Orleans today instead of tomorrow, so I can avoid that weather. But so some of these things have had their hearings postponed till next week. But I don't, you know, the groups that are spending the big money are businesses that donate heavily to super PACs that support one Democrats or Republicans in the state either in the state Senate or the state House. Businesses give a lot of money to them, but then nonprofits give a lot of money to both sides too. And you can't trace the money in those nonprofits. And those are pure ideological moves from what I can tell. So Beth?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Sandra. I think I loved seeing all the different links you have to the different information places, which I never realized how much information you get on the Secretary of State website. That's amazing. So yeah, just some of that is just nice to know. I made some notes to look in the future if I have questions about that kind of thing, because I think it's great to know it's there. And I guess I'm very active with Moms Demand Action, which of course is the grassroots non-paid part of every town. So it was interesting to see that every town's, according to your chart, spent about $100,000 just in Colorado in 2023. So I wondered if that was just for lobbying, or does that include like supporting candidates? Because we do have gun sense candidates that we will support. And I know like nationally, well, John Hickenlooper, for one thing, was endorsed by every town. So I'm sure some monies went into that campaign. So I just wondering if your charts was just for lobbyists or for other things.
That chart under the lobbying section, and there's a bit.ly link in the chat that you can have that access to that document, and you know, get to those links. But let's share my screen again. So if I search on every town and just do 2023, you can see which bills they lobbied and who they were paying to lobby for them. Adam Eichberg, yeah. Kathleen Hallgren. I don't know. My sense is that those people are in a firm, but I don't see the firm listed. So they've got 3 or 4 lobbyists, and I am just going to find, I got out my old spreadsheets here. And okay, so they're paying Headwaters Strategies, basically. And then they've got a couple of people of their own. Like these people, these other two people are from New York. And so, you know, they're paying Headwaters like $7,500 a month.
Okay.
And then they're paying their own people a certain amount of money. So that looks like where that comes from.
Okay, so that's more, that wouldn't be like a lobbyist who actually shows up at the Capitol. It's more
Yeah.
like getting like consultants kind of thing, I guess,
Well,
right?
Adam Eichberg is at the Capitol every day.
Okay.
And there are other people on his staff that are there every day. So yeah, I
Okay.
think,
I
yeah.
guess because I'm just thinking of, all of our volunteers that basically show up at the hearings and do all the testifying and all of that. So they're not paid. But then obviously we have some every town paid lobbyists who are also there at the hearings, or are they more listed in the background?
I feel like those people are doing some strategy. They're typically the lobbyists, the paid lobbyists are typically, they're not going to testify.
Okay.
They're going to get you folks from Mom's Demand to come in and talk. They're going to organize that, and they are going to talk to individual lawmakers, especially people who are players, who are sponsors of the bill. They are going to talk about, what your organization might accept and what they are against. They are delving into the real details and the nitty gritty
Okay.
of,
Yeah.
of what the actual legalese is there, and
Yeah, that makes
helping
sense.
organize, the volunteers and sort of what the theme of the testimony is. But you're rarely going to see them testifying. They're standing in the hallway on the second floor trying to nab lobbyists or lawmakers as they come off the floor or catch them in their office.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I know that we have what we call branded testimony. So in other words, if we're going to testify and say we're testifying for Moms Demand Action, then we have to use, testimony that has been approved by every town. So I'm sure that's the paid lobbyists probably look at all of that and make sure that we're, saying
Exactly.
what should be said.
Exactly.
We can testify on our own, and say whatever we would like to say, but yeah. Okay.
Yeah. That's it. That's interesting to me. I mean, I doubt that some other groups are that organized.
Yeah. And the league, right, Rihanna? The league has a paid lobbyist. And
Yes,
also some volunteers that go lobby on these
yes,
bills. Okay.
they do. Andrea Wilkins was here a little while ago. I think she had to leave, but she's our paid lobbyist. And then the Legislative Action Committee, there must be almost 20 people now who are also, registered as lobbyists, citizen lobbyists, and with the stamp of approval of the LAC, they can go and talk to people as representatives of the league, and we can submit written testimony as members of the league. And of course, all of us all the time can always go as individuals, either in person or written testimony. But if you represent the league, then you do have to be stamped.
They actually have a list of, if you look at the main lobbyist page I showed you on the toward the bottom of the right hand column, they have a list that you could click on of volunteer lobbyists, and I think they have to lobby just through the legislature. I can't remember where it is now, but like AFP also has a ton of people who are registered as volunteers, Americans for Prosperity. So if you have volunteers there who are lobbying, you have to do that. Testifying is a different thing. Representing Mom's Demand is when you're not like talking to lawmakers and trying to convince them as something on behalf of mom's demand. You know, if you're just a constituent talking to them, you don't have to worry about it.
Thanks.
All right. Do we have other questions? No? Okay. Well, Sandra, this has been really interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I follow your work quite a bit. What a good job you do.
I appreciate it.
And yeah, enjoy your wedding in New Orleans while we're shoveling snow. Okay.
I'm sorry. Not sorry. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Good night.